Good evening, everyone. If you're anything like me, you've just rushed here, battled some traffic, gotten a child to babysitting, and if you're a little bit flustered like me, just take a big deep breath. Oh. And you're not up here in front of this lineup. You're all willing me to get off real quick. On behalf of CEDA Women, I extend a very warm welcome to you all 375 of you or so, I believe, in the room tonight, and to 1,000 or so who have joined us online. Welcome. I hope you're comfy and settled in wherever you are, because we are indeed in for a robust conversation tonight. I am Rana Hussain. I'm an inclusion and belonging advocate, broadcaster and writer. And as the child of Indian migrants who migrated here in the early 1970s, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather here tonight, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And on behalf of all of us, I recognise their continued connection to the land and waters of this beautiful place that we live in. I acknowledge that they never ceded sovereignty. They never did. We respect all Wurundjeri elders and ancestors and any First Nations people here today. Of course, today's event wouldn't be possible without supporters and partners, and so I would like to thank BGIS and Brave Feminine Leadership, the Brave group, for bringing us all together here this evening. And I was just saying, walking up on the stage, that it's been 2 years since I've spoken to a live audience, so I'm just shaking it all out a little bit. Welcome members of the media as well in attendance today. You are all storytellers. You're the shop front, and we thank you for being here and for being engaged and your ongoing engagement. Of course, please do remember, if you're rusty like me, to turn your mobiles onto silent, and if you're anything like me, you have a random alarm set to remind you to do something, double check that as well. When I was asked to provide the introduction for tonight's event by Melinda, Solento actually, in full transparency, I didn't even really hear what she was asking me to do. I just said yes, because I heard the names Megan Davis, Rebecca Scott, Grace Tame and Penny Wong. Of course, I then did the prudent thing and looked up what the event actually was. And I was really pleased to see that it was Women Who Lead, Advocating for the Vulnerable. And I was asked to outline very quickly why this conversation is so important. And I did write a kind of pithy, reasoned paragraph, but I actually thought I'd share something very different. As I walked in, it reminded me. I DM'd Grace Tame a few weeks ago, and she, I assume, gets 1,000 DMs a day, so I don't expect that she will have seen it. But it reminded me of why this conversation is so important, so I thought I'd read that out instead. It read, "Grace, I cannot thank you enough. The shame I feel and the fear I feel is suffocating. I worry as a woman of colour if I speak out. If I speak out, it will harm my community more than it will help. Nor do I feel like I will really be believed. Your voice is so powerful. I know you've heard all this before, but I just wanted to thank you very personally for what you are doing. I wish there were more. I wish I could be one of you. I see how you are treated, and I shudder to think about what they will do to me. Your bravery is everything. Thank you." And so, as a survivor of sexual assault myself, of sexual harassment, of intimate partner violence, of racism and sexism, I thank you all of you sitting here. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. And the reason this conversation is so important is because I need you. I need you to lead. And so I thank you for that. So that's my piece done. And I'm going to now introduce you to CEDA's Chief Executive, Melinda Solento, who's going to facilitate the conversation today.
I'm just going to pause for a moment. Well, thanks for that introduction, Rana, and for your courage. Sharing personal stories and letting others know that they're not alone is an important part of leading the vulnerable. So whilst you may think that you're not a leader, you absolutely are. You are for what you just did then, but can I also say that I've witnessed Rana tackling racism and being oh so brave in the conversations that she has in rooms where others hold the power. And so I've seen her courage and bravery on many other fronts, and so let me thank you for that, and thank you for setting the tone, I guess, for the conversation that we're about to have. As Rana said, I'm Melinda Solento, the CEO of CEDA, the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. I'd like to add my acknowledgement to the one which Rana gave to the traditional owners, and one of the things that I do like to do is to encourage people in reflecting on the acknowledgement to just actually understand that what we're doing is what's been happening on this land for tens of thousands of years, sharing stories, sharing knowledge, and connecting to one another on the issues that are the most important ones to us and to our community. I actually have the great privilege and honour to be joining this conversation today because I'm filling in for Dana Nelson, who's the President and Managing Director Asia Pacific, BGIS. She is unfortunately unwell. She has COVID and so could not be here tonight, and I'm sure she's desperately disappointed not to be able to participate in this conversation, and one which is very near and dear to her heart. BGIS are CEDA members whose engagement with us and support for events like this is really important to us and greatly appreciated by us. I'm not going to say too much more because I know that you are really wanting to hear from these amazing ladies and from Megan Davis, who I'm hoping is going to pop up on screen at some point soon. But let me introduce, here she is. Let me just quickly introduce this incredible lineup of speakers. I'm sure most of you know Professor Megan Davis. She is the University of New South Wales' first Pro-Vice-Chancellor Indigenous, Professor of Law and the Balnaves Chair of Constitutional Law, and of course very directly involved in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Rebecca Scott, who's on the end here, is co-founder of hospitality social enterprise STREAT, based here in Melbourne. They've been running for more than a decade now, and in their first decade intensively supported and skilled up nearly 600 vulnerable young people and have worked with over 3,000 more. Grace Tame, who's immediately to my left, is of course the 2021 Australian of the Year, an inspiration and advocate for victims of child sexual abuse, and if you don't know her, I don't know where you've been. And then in the middle is, of course, Senator the Honourable Penny Wong, Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade, and a vocal supporter of the same-sex marriage vote. Now, we've got about 45 minutes, and we're going to do questions. I'm going to ask a few questions to get everyone started, and I am just going to say this. I think just talking to everyone in the room beforehand, it's been pretty challenging the last little while. And so I think, we'll try to get everyone excited and inspirational, but I do just want to say that it's challenging times, and so we might also reflect a lot on what it takes to be resilient in the face of everything that's going on around us. Now, I'm going to do questions from the floor and also questions through Pigeonhole, and the details should be up on the screen at some point, but it's cedar.pigeonhole.at, and the password, Sharon, is women. And the password is women. So you can ask questions via the Pigeonhole app or by raising your hand in the room. And I'm sorry, I apologise to those of you who are online. Thank you so much for joining us as well. So I'm just going to jump over here and get the conversation started. Now, there we go. So the first question I had, and Maybe Megan, I'm gonna ask you straight out of the gate if you like. Otherwise, we don't want to forget you on the screen, and we'll let you dive straight into the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm leaning over like you can see me. I'm sorry. I feel like an idiot now. Anyway, I think one of the things that so many people in the room and even in the green room beforehand were sort of interested to understand is how do you explain how you got involved in taking on these leadership roles? Like, where did you find your voice? Can you give us a bit of insight into that, Megan?
Yeah, sure. Hi. I should say off the bat that I'm ringing in from Yugambeh country up here in Logan City in Eagleby, where I grew up in my mum's housing commission home. So I'm kind of stuck in a very tiny corner of the house that has reception. So for me, I'd been in and around Aboriginal kind of leadership, not leadership roles, but among leadership doing various jobs as a kind of university student and much later when I joined ATSIC. I think, from the age of 20 to 30, I didn't really say anything because in our culture, leadership is something that comes a bit later as you gain experience, etc. And there's a lot of cultural protocol involved in listening. And I listened for 10 years. And then early in my 30s, I was fortunate, I think, to be in a position where I was an academic and a scholar. I'd started my work as a constitutional lawyer. And it was Jenny Macklin, actually, who nominated me for a United Nations role. And I was really surprised. It's one of the primary UN bodies in Geneva, because although I was the only one who practiced in that field and had worked with the UN and had, my PhD was on the topic, often these leadership positions are given to men, Aboriginal men. And I was a very kind of junior scholar at the time. And she nominated me to that UN Permanent Forum role. It was a competitive election. I had to, like speed dating, you still got to get elected by the UN member states. But that then opened up a whole career pathway for me because I served 2 terms and then went on to serve at the expert mechanism where I am in Geneva now. But Jenny also thought of me when Julia Gillard set up the UN expert mechanism on the, UN, I'm getting my jobs mixed up, the expert panel on the recognition of constitutional recognition. So we are now in our 11th year or 2nd decade of that constitutional recognition process that was set up by Gillard. But Macklin really encouraged my selection because of the work that I'd done on constitutional recognition to that point. And she didn't want to see, a young Aboriginal woman's kind of voice not be elevated when it was precisely the topic that I'd been writing on and working on. And so I suppose that's actually one of the defining moments. Nobody knew me from a bar of soap. I was very junior. I was just at a university, but I was fortunate that she had advisors around her that knew who was working on what. And but her having confidence in me and also thinking about the important role that Aboriginal women have to play in these policy areas really opened up so much for me. And that's how really I began my work on what led to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So that early work on the expert panel, seeing the expert panel's kind of options rejected, and then working really hard in a very kind of dead period to work with both sides of politics to come up with, constitutional lawyers, to come up with an option that fits better with Australia's political and legal culture. And then Turnbull put me on the referendum council, which then led to me being able to design the Uluru Dialogues and led to that consensus. So, that was a really key moment for me, is just someone taking very seriously that role of looking across the country and appointing me, or not appointing me, but putting me forward to those positions.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I'm going to come back with some questions because I've already got about 700 for you, but just based on that. But Beck, maybe over to you. Different background. What motivated you to sort of find your voice and dive in and basically start an incredible social enterprise that's transformed people's lives?
Oh, I took a really weird U-turn. So I'm a scientist originally by training. I trained as a plant biologist, was in Canberra at the CSIRO, had been in Canberra for, I think it was probably 8 years at the time, went on annual leave to Vietnam, and just this random thing happened where I ended up in a park one night with a whole bunch of little kids playing hacky sack with them. One little kid I taught to thumb wrestle. As I'm thumb wrestling away with this little kid, he was probably 5 or 6 years old, all the other kids kind of disappeared out into the night, and I was there with him by himself, and we ended up sitting on this little park bench together. I don't know his name. I couldn't speak any Vietnamese. He couldn't speak any English, and we just sat on this little park bench together, holding hands. And I don't know how long it took me to realise that actually I was sitting on his bed. So underneath that park bench, he had a tiny little piece of cardboard. And he was showing me the most hospitality that he could, and he was sleeping rough on that park bench. And I remember just the utter helplessness, riding off in the night on the back of a motorbike to a hotel where I was going to have a nice night, and just thinking, whose responsibility is he? And I started looking, surely it's his government's responsibility. Well, his government doesn't even admit that they have a homelessness population, let alone have a welfare system that can address it. I kept on thinking, is it the NGOs that are in that country? And I just kept on asking the question again and again, whose responsibility is he? And then when I got back to Australia, I just started to look in our own country and started to see, well, how many kids do we have, in our own country who are homeless and sleeping rough? And it was just like once I saw him and I saw all of the other children in our own country that were homeless, I couldn't unsee them. And so it was kind of like, for me, the equivalent of kind of getting a stone in my shoe. So I would say this tiny little kid in Vietnam was the catalyst for me. He became my stone in my shoe. And 4 years later, I was back in Vietnam doing some volunteer work and stumbled upon a hospitality social enterprise in Hanoi. Rang my lovely partner, now wife, Kate, and said, I've just found the thing I want to do for the rest of my life. Came back, took my long service leave from CSIRO and launched headlong into building one of these damn things. So I'm a plant biologist who went AWOL, really.
With maybe a little bit of higher risk appetite than some. Grace, I suspect many feel they have some knowledge of your experience and what's brought you here, but can you tell us a little bit more about how it is you found your voice and continue to find your voice?
Well, first of all, I too would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered today, and the fact that still today there are so many stories, so many voices yet to be heard. And I sit here in a leadership position that I actually didn't choose. It wasn't a conscious choice that I ever had to be a leader. I didn't nominate myself for Australian of the Year. I didn't actually really know about what the Australian of the Year awards program was until Max and I walked into the Crown Plaza and we looked up at this big wall of posters and we were like, oh crap, Cathy Freeman was an Australian of the Year. But I think I'd like to actually take you guys back quite a lot further than perhaps I've taken people on the journey, because I'm very sort of future focused. I like to talk about prevention and advocacy and how we can create structural change. And I talk about my story really only in the context of how we can talk about grooming to create that change, and less about sort of like Grace as a child. But I guess it's really relevant in this context because I suppose it does help people understand where perhaps I did find my voice. I I suppose in life I always was more of an observer, or a better observer than a participant. I come from a broken family, not an unloving family. Both my parents are wonderful people, and have always loved me, and that's never something I've gone without. We perhaps weren't the wealthiest family in terms of material or financial things, but we were never without love and care. But my parents separated when I was about 1, and I was their only child, and I was living 3 days here and 3 days there, and I really lived most of my time out of a school bag, and I sort of just, I went here and there, and I was just sort of adhering to whatever dynamic I was in at the time, and because of that, I never really knew what my own needs were, and I had a very confused sense of identity, and I didn't really have any stability, and because of that, I guess I didn't really have my own voice, and I tolerated a lot of mistreatment, and there was someone in my life quite close to me who treated me particularly poorly, and instead of standing up to them, I actually would apologise to them. I would smile at them, I would appease them, and this became a pattern, and as I got older and, and other people and boys started mistreating me, I would do the same. And this became a cumulative thing. I was conditioned, and then it all came to a head. And one day, I found myself in a tiny office yelling at a pedophile. I was pointing my finger at him, telling him I thought that he was a monster and that I hated him for what he had done to me, what he had done to my family. And I pointed at a picture of his own adult children that were twice my age at the time, and I said, I hoped he died. And 4 days later, I was making a statement to police, and my fear of upsetting the apple cart died that day, privately. And it sure as hell died publicly, standing next to the Prime Minister last month. And I've realised something over the last year, is that it doesn't take huge gestures to stand up and find your voice and be a circuit breaker of abuse culture. That you can just do those little things, whether it's a frown, to find courage. Courage isn't a choice, it's just a decision to act in a moment. It's about integrity. That's what it is. And leadership is a really funny concept. I think a lot of people, and I'm not going to name names, but I think a lot of people think it's about having power over. It's not. It's about empowering others. It's about walking alongside your fellow champions. And, you can be weak and strong at the same time. You can admit your vulnerabilities. You can admit that you've made mistakes. You can keep making mistakes along the way, and it can still be okay. We're human beings. We get tired. We fall down. We can pick ourselves back up. And that's what being a true leader is. I think, anyway. But
I think we might agree with you.
Any profound statement should end with.
Well, that's good. That's good. I'll take that on board. All right. No. So, Penny, let me bring you to the conversation now. Grace has touched on so many issues there. We're going to be here all night, but unfortunately, Grace actually has to catch a plane, just to let everyone know. Penny, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, and I guess partly because when you listen to so many of the things that Grace just said, that doesn't sound like the kind of leadership that we often see in politics. That standing alongside people and those types of things, it just seems to be not where we're at. And this isn't, it's for a long time, really. And I'm wondering if that's the game you thought you were getting into. how did you find your voice, and how did you think you were going to exercise leadership, and maybe give me some reflections on that in 30 seconds or less.
30 seconds. Thank you. Also want to acknowledge the traditional owners, want to acknowledge the wonderful women I'm surrounded by, virtually and actually. Where to start? So I think the finding your own voice thing, which is the thing I always say when people say, what's the best career advice you ever got? And I say, this was it. And they say, what does it mean? And I said, I think it means finding how you want to speak. Not just parroting or mimicking someone else who has ostensible authority. I think the question about leadership, so if the question is thinking about my journey, I think there's lots of layers, aren't there? There's a sort of personal psychological motivation which you can talk about. So for me, probably the experience of racism. Coming here, there was a particularly bad neighbour who used to abuse me. So perhaps we should thank her. Thanks for the graffiti and the abuse over the fence when I was 8 years old. Certainly steeled the resolve. But I think it made me... There are really only two choices when you're confronted with that, aren't there? You either kind of put your head down, or you say, I'm going to do something. And at 8, I probably just tried to be the best at most things. But then I had a lot of wonderful people through my life. You know, my grandmother, who I talked about in my first speech, who was just the most extraordinarily strong woman who lived through the war in Malaysia. My mum, men and women in politics, John Faulkner, Jenny Macklin, and many others who've supported me and helped me. So I think that's the journey. But your question about standing alongside, it's an interesting one, because I think that isn't the model of leadership that we in politics, that the political class has demonstrated or actually prioritised. And more, the longer I'm in politics, and I've been there a while now, I actually think that's the sort of leadership people want. And the March for Justice, or the campaign for marriage equality, or the apology and reconciliation. I mean, these are profoundly important changes in our society, and they were led by people. That people showed courage, and people showed enormous courage, but they actually brought people together. And I think there's something about the bringing people together which at our best we do, and at our worst we turn our backs on.
So Megan, I'm going to bring you in just on the tail end of that conversation. Hopefully you heard Penny's remarks about sort of leading alongside, because I was thinking about the voice and the Uluru statement. So I just wanted to just give you an opportunity to perhaps reflect on that and how you're seeing leadership perhaps through that lens. But at the risk of asking you two questions at once, I was also going to ask, so you got nominated to these important positions by someone who identified your leadership qualities and sort of pushed you up the ladder perhaps, right? But there would have been other people who thought that those roles were for them. So I'm just interested in maybe your reflections on that and how you managed that when... And I know so many women I've spoken to, this is the issue. They get nominated for things and people say, well, that should have gone to insert someone else, usually already in a position of power. So 2 questions for one, if I could.
Thanks for that. It's been an interesting experience in terms of the Voice to Parliament. I mean, I did... my second story to the Macklin story, is that as an Aboriginal person who's deeply connected to her community and grew up in community and, has been involved in the movement, I never thought of myself as a leader. People don't. And that's always one of my objections, as you would know from to emerging leaders, where, we're a gerontocracy, which means we're led by elders, and it's up to our elders to determine, and our cultural authority to determine who are leaders, not anyone outside of that. And one of the moments that I really realised that, actually I'm in this space, was after the Uluru Statement, and a colleague of mine, a young Barkindji lawyer, Gemma McKinnon, we were driving to UNSW Law School for something, and it was the day that Malcolm Turnbull had dismissed the entire Uluru agenda, calling it a third chamber, which, was really offensive, and he knew wasn't a third chamber, and using that kind of language was just inflammatory and intended to, diminish the work that we've done. So he'd done that the morning before, there was a leak the night before, and Noel, we were driving along, and Noel Pearson comes on the radio, Patricia Cavalis, like just railing against Turnbull and what he's done after all of the hard work of our people across the country. And Gemma just burst into tears. She was driving the car, and I'm like, we need to pull over, because she's sobbing, and just physically just sobbing. I mean, she pulled over, and we listened to the rest of Noel, and we talked about it, because of course I realised, although I'd brought her along as a junior administrative public lawyer, an Aboriginal woman, to experience the work and train her up, and then I realised, I've brought all of these young people on this journey, and this is the first time that they've heard the Australian government say no. They were actually younger than me, and they hadn't had that experience, and she was absolutely gutted, because she'd done the work in good faith. We'd redesigned the proposal. We didn't go for the non-discrimination clause in the Constitution. We went for something that would fit the Australian political and legal culture much more. The intellectual work was extraordinary, but so was the dialogue. And for it all to be reduced to a third chamber and to be dumped so unceremoniously, I just remember sitting there going, this is what it's meant. This is what it's like to be a leader. I need to now reach out to all the young people and get Noel Pearson, get Pat Anderson, and we need to talk to them about what's just happened. And I think, that was that key moment where, leadership really became apparent to me in that sense. And of course, but a lot's happened since then. We're not dead in the water, obviously. Turnbull actually made more Australians listen to what it was that he'd rejected when there was no public discussion or debate. So that was really important too, because of course we're facing a sliding doors moment with the upcoming election, with the possibility of a referendum in the first term under Labor, and more of the same in terms of status quo with the opposition. And it's with the government, sorry, getting them mixed up already. So there is actually a real choice. And as you know, Melinda, with reconciliation and the theme this year, Be Brave, we need Australians to jump off the Pollyanna reconciliation fence and make a choice. There's a choice here. You either vote for a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament, or you vote for more of the same. And that's where the rubber hits the road with reconciliation. On your second, I'll be really quick, sorry. I actually can't remember the second question.
Okay, well,
sorry.
That's all right. That's my fault. That's really bad moderating on my part, so I apologise. That's me, and I'm going to... Sorry. I'm going to put my hand up and say, if there's a question in the room, please put your hand up, and someone from CEDA will bring a mic over, and then you can introduce yourself and ask your question. But before I do so, I've got a whole bunch of questions coming in here. Marcel, I'm going to tell you that Rachel, I am going to get to your question, but Marcel, I'm going to ask your question now. So Marcel's jumped into Pigeonhole and asked the question we sort of talked about prior to coming on stage, which is, what sustains you? And Grace, I'm going to ask you that question. What are the things that give you strength? What are the little wins? And what sustains you as you just, seemingly traverse the country, having these conversations and advocating for tremendous change?
Where's Max? Don't want to throw him under the bus.
He's having a sleep.
He probably needs it. Well, no, first, number one is Max. I would not be here without Max. Again, rewind the clock to January 25th. 2021, and Max and I were two 26-year-olds. I was unemployed. We were living in a housing commission area. We had no media training. We had no idea what we were doing. We were just making it up as we went along. And we are still a PR team of two, doing our spicy tweets from home. Yeah, and you know, he is my everything. He's my whole world. You know, and so in that sense, nothing has changed. We sustain each other, I hope. You know, I think, you know, some people say in a relationship everyone has to bring 50%. We believe each person has to bring 100%. And sometimes Max has to bring a little bit more than 100%. I have to be honest. You know, because I don't like to complain. You know, because I'm incredibly grateful, and I'm very aware that I'm going on a tangent. No, I'm very aware of the fact that it is a great privilege to be heard, and a privilege that very few get. You know, especially you know, our First Nations people with disabilities, you know, migrants, and other further marginalised people. You know, face even greater barriers to justice, and in fact, in some cases, their paths to justice are impossible. Let's be real. And so I don't take this platform lightly at all. But in saying that, this journey has not been easy. Some of the criticism that I receive, you know, it's part and parcel of being in the public space, but at times it is indefensibly cruel. And the toll on our mental health, not just my own, is, I can't really describe it, because unless you've sort of been in that space, you know, it's hard to relate to. And what sustains us, you know, is trying as best we can to stay in touch with meaningful values, to be grounded, but sometimes that's almost impossible to do when you're pulled in all these different directions, you know, and you've got all these different people telling you should do this and do that, and you know, putting unrealistic demands on your time and your energy, and criticism is coming from even within the sector that you work in, which is disheartening, to say the least. And I said this the other day. I was very privileged to be just in the presence of Rosie Batty, who was our 2015 Australian of the Year, who is a hero of mine, who has done great work. You know, I stand on the shoulders of giants. You know, there are many people who came before me whose work has paved the way for people like myself. You know, and I was saying that, you know, it is important to be able to hold space for criticism and to hold each other to account. But ultimately, if we spend a disproportionate amount of time tearing each other down, the people who will benefit from that are the perpetrators. We cannot afford to be doing that. You know, and there is enough space to hold each other to account, but also to celebrate the successes that we do have, and to work on improving what we are already doing, and to work with each other, and to move forward. So what sustains me is the positives. It's working with each other and learning and growing together. That is what sustains me.
Thanks, Grace. Anything either of you on the stage would like to add to that?
I would actually say exactly the same thing. It's my partner, Kate. We met on a volleyball court in Canberra when we were in our mid-20s, studying at ANU, and we've been in each other's lives for more than 25 years now. And we arrived in this city with a shitty old white Corolla with all of our life packed in the back of it, in a city that we didn't know anyone. And to kind of pack up life and kind of go and build something that neither of us are from hospitality. Kate's a clinical and forensic psychologist, so neither of us had ever built a social enterprise, and neither of us had been in hospitality. But to co-found something, to do it together, and to be on that journey together. And so I would agree with Grace that I'm probably the person that kind of is the front-facing part of STREAT, but the kind of anchor is always there, Kate. And then the other thing that I would say is our beautiful, beautiful son, Will, every single night we sit down as a family for dinner, and every night we have the same formula. We have to go through the best, worst and funniest of the day. And when you're working in crisis, or with hundreds of young people in crisis at any given time, your day job's pretty full on. There's a lot of stuff that's always happening at work, but finding the way to always end the day with a lot of laughter and hilarity, and trying to just find the humour in the absurdity of the things that are happening. So just staying really grounded, and those fun moments that you have, which is kind of the only thing that keeps you a bit sane if your work's heavy. It's time with kids, I think, always really helps.
Really quickly. It is rugged, and I think it's rugged life is hard for lots of people, isn't it? But I think public life is difficult for some of the reasons that Grace has averted to. Secondly, I always try to hold on to something I kept saying to groups of very distressed people during the marriage equality campaign. I would say, remember, you are not defined by other people's hatred. And third, I think the people who love you, partner and kids. My children think I'm too squishy to be in Parliament. It's true. You're too squishy, Ma. Anyway, I said there are very few people in Parliament who would say that, Alexander. But thank you.
We're going to get the T-shirt made. Is there a question in the room? I cannot see anyone. All right, I'm going to keep... Oh, there's one over here. There's one here. Okay, let's go. We'll come over to you, I promise. Let's just go proximity first.
I was just hoping that Professor Davis could answer the same question about what sustains her.
Well, yeah, it's been a hard slog since Uluru. What sustains me week after week is our people's voicelessness. I mean, nothing has changed since Uluru. The exigency of the reform is as great as it is today as it was in 2014, when the current Commonwealth government started to walk back its obligations under the Constitution set up for them by the Australian people in 1967. There are people, our people, the sense of powerlessness and voicelessness is palpable. And although I am, like Grace, child of the Housing Commission, child of the underclass, child of Australia's welfare system, which I am proud of, and social mobility works for my family, but there's a lot of people it hasn't worked for, and so their voice is what gets me out of bed every morning and keep fighting for Uluru. When they asked for a voice to Parliament, they were saying that the political system doesn't listen to them, and the government came back and said, "Oh no, you don't want a voice to Parliament, you want a voice to government." And then when we said, "Oh, actually, it's the sequence: it's voice, then truth, then treaty, or voice, treaty, truth, or voice, Makarrata," people come back and say, "Oh no, there's no sequence. The sequence doesn't, don't worry about the sequence. We can do voice, treaty, truth all at the same time." And time after time, all we've heard is people not listening to what they're saying. And that's the important thing about Uluru, is it's decided to speak to the Australian people and ask them to accept our invitation to walk with us in a way that they did in 67. And so that's what sustains me. I mean, it is tough. I haven't had a warm dinner meal for 5 years post Uluru. The work that is required to talk to mob every night for 4 to 5 years, it's full on. I mean, Auntie Pat and I, just an endless yarn, keeping people informed, explaining things to mob, and, trying to do the best that we can to push the Uluru mandate forward. And so that's what sustains me. It is what sustains me.
We've got a question over here. Yeah, we'll give a round of applause. If I can just add 2 cents worth in, I think one of the things that's really struck me, I'm involved with Reconciliation Australia, is that, number one, how many jobs people like Megan have, and formal and informal jobs, and it's just astounding, and also just the availability to community that Megan was just talking about is just extraordinary, and the commitment is amazing, and I don't understand how people just keep doing it and doing it. I mean, the boundless energy just astounds me, quite frankly. But the other thing I wanted to say, on a perhaps less positive note, and Grace sort of touched on it, but if you know leaders, people who are leading and leading for change, and particularly people who are different, women of colour, the criticism on social media is just unbelievable. It's unrelenting, it's vile, it's aggressive, it's violent, and it's horrible. And so, and they get it every day. And I've seen some of this, and the resilience in just being able to look past that, I just think is unbelievable. And so for those of you who haven't had that experience, it is just something to sort of reflect on and admire each of these women all the more for. Now, question over here.
Hi. My name's Jodie. I'm from Bupa, and my question was originally directed to Penny, but possibly all the other panel members might have a good perspective to share as well. And firstly, thank you all for your insights and sharing your story so far this evening. I guess my question is around the fact that it can take a very long time to achieve the changes that most of us are either working on or want to see. And Penny, I know you, in terms of the marriage equality bill, had the journey to get to that place was very long, even just within the Labor Party, let alone within the Australian electorate. And I was just wondering whether I'd love to hear maybe your top 3 lessons or top 3 principles of, I guess, achieving change, but also bringing along people who don't necessarily. Achieving that change requires us to talk to people who don't agree with us and to change people's minds, and just your reflections on how you go about doing that.
What you just said is exactly what I say to people. I say, remember, to change people, you have to change people's minds. That means you talk to people who don't agree with you. That's how change happens. What are my 3 lessons? Well, that's one. I think the first actually is change is very, very hard to achieve. And it's not linear, and Grace is right when she talked about small things sometimes can demonstrate or ratify that change, be a symbol of that. But it can be incredibly hard. And I remember I was in front of State Parliament House a little while ago. It was a rally to finally formally decriminalise abortion, take it out of the criminal code, and I thought, I'm 52, I think I was 52, maybe 53, I have to count. And I thought, I remember going to a rally like this when I was 17, and I'm still here, right? So those 2 things, really hard to achieve, takes a long time, but the third is, there is no substitute for committed, passionate individuals who come together to be agents of change. There's not another way. So, when people talk about being the change, I think that's it. There is a path. There is one path, which is people have to do stuff. So that was not very eloquent, was it? You got to do stuff.
Got to do stuff. But Penny, you forgot to finish it off with. You got to do stuff.
Okay, can I add something in there that just a bit theoretical, I guess? There's a whole field of science called implementation science. It's like pretty much how you get shit done in the world. And when you think about social capital...
swearing.
Sorry. How to get stuff done in the world. But there's, to get stuff done in the world, social capital is kind of critical, but there's 2 types of social capital. There's bonding social capital, where you're kind of hanging out with people like you and doing things with people that you identify. But there's bridging capital, and it's those people that just keep laterally, bridging to people of difference and people who aren't like you. And so I would always say, if you want to get stuff done in the world, the criticality of finding people who don't look like you and doing stuff with them can't be underestimated. We don't change anything if we just talk to ourselves. So, yeah, for me, it's social capital.
Anyone spot the science nerd there and the theory of change framework that Bex just brought? Grace, you look like you want to say something.
Well, you have to take a multi-pronged approach with change. I mean, it's all well and good to change hearts and minds, but you ultimately, to create real change, you have to do it at the structural level. But, because, and especially if we're talking about abuse culture, it's actually codified in society. It's systemic. It's entrenched in our laws. That's why we set up the creatively named Grace Tame Foundation. And we're tackling specific things. But I do want to just take a moment, if you'll indulge me, to talk about a couple of things which I hope will inspire you. Because like these wonderful women have talked about and touched on, talking to people who you don't necessarily agree with. Really how you inspire change is through genuine human connection. Okay? I had a moment just the other day when I was flat out exhausted. I was at a bar with my cousin and Max, and I walked past two big men. Now I am 5'3.5" on a good day. These two men were huge. I walked past them. I was minding my own business, and they just one of them just pointed at me. He goes, "You're that girl," which is not a lovely way to be, encountered. And I turned around and, there'd been a headline from the lovely newspaper, the Daily Mail, about my mental health issues. And, that was 3 hours before, and it wouldn't have been a good look for me to put my fist through somebody's face. So I just smiled and held my ground. And he goes, "You're that girl, I know your eyes." And fair enough. And I said, "Hello. What are your names?" And they introduced themselves. I came over and I said, "Hello, I'm Grace." They had their arms folded, which is not really a traditionally welcoming sign of body language. It was just me and a friend of mine who was also a female. And so, we were kind of outnumbered. And I felt quite uncomfortable, but I was patient with them. And the next thing he said to me was, when are you gonna run for Labor?" And I said, "Actually, believe it or not, I'm apolitical." He said, "Oh, the media paints you as being a real bitch." And I said, "Oh, thank you. Actually, hadn't noticed. I'll give you a little bit of background." I said, "I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse, and throughout the year, there've been a sequence of events. Scott has deliberately protected an alleged rapist. He allowed him to receive $1 million in anonymous donations to pay his own personal legal fees. The message that sends to survivors of sexual abuse, let alone perpetrators in the community, is hugely damaging, to say the least. And then if we want to go into a further discussion about cutting funding to prevention education, and the scraps of funding for other factions of the sector, and I went on and gave very clear-cut examples that are proven, that have been written about. And by the end of the conversation, these two grown men who were, you know, when they stood up, 6 foot tall, towering above me, actually said, one of them, he said, I'm sorry, you've actually changed my mind. You know, I could have had every right to walk away from them when he just pointed his finger at me and said, you're that girl. But 10 minutes I spent with them, and I talked with them and connected with them on a human level. And that's just two people, you know. But that's the sort of stuff that matters, you know. It was like 10 p.m. I was done. I wanted to go and have a beer. That's what I wanted to do. And I did. I went and had my beer. But it's that sort of stuff, you know, because those two men probably would have gone and had conversations with their friends. And it's that domino effect of change, you know. So circuit breakers, that's what really matters in society too.
Thanks, Grace. Now, I'm just looking at my watch, and you can see my watch there too, in case you need to go.
Sorry. Oh yeah, I do. I need to get on a plane.
Yeah. So if you
I
need
need to get on a plane.
Yeah. So if you need to go, you can go whenever. But I'm going to, and let me just tell everyone what's going to happen now. I know we've got another question. I'm sorry, but we're running out of time, and I've got some questions here. I'm going to try to. Is Max waving? Is Max saying, please, time to go? So this is what we're going to do. I've
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Grace. Here, I'll take that. Down the... yeah. Now, unfortunately, for those of you who are watching on the live stream, what I'm about to say is going to annoy you, but we're going to break shortly for drinks and a bit of chit-chat. But I've just got... I'm going to give you each a choice of the question that you ask, or that you answer, and then we're going to finish off, if that's okay. And I'm sorry for people who've got more questions, and there's heaps on the that've come through on the iPad. We'll try to actually unpack some of these over the coming months in further conversations and in blogs and whatever else, and get some experts to tackle some of these issues as well. But here's the question. Megan, I'll start with you. You can answer one or both of these questions, which is, a lot of people are sort of sending through questions that kind of amount to, what can I do? What can I do? And or what gives you hope?
Yeah, good question. So what can I do? Well, you can go to the uluru-statement.org website. So straight after Uluru, like literally the day after, we're all exhausted, and we thought, oh shit, we just issued an invitation to the Australian people, so now we need a website to put the invitation up for Aussies to come and check it out and sign up. And so in terms of the cultural mandate and the cultural leadership of Uluru, we all work together, and our website is uluru-statement.org. And if you sign up on that website, you get regular updates and things, but on the website is a letter to your MP. So a big thing about Uluru is it's with our old people, we had invited Campbell to the Rock, and we're going to present a bark petition with the Uluru. And then the elders were like, you know what? In this day and age with political inertia, it's not going to work. So we've got to issue this invitation to the Australian people. We're going to have to get them to work with us, to push them to vote yes. And so there's a letter to your MP, one of those fancy little things that you set up that kind of give you, we'll send off an automated email to your local member and to the Prime Minister. But we really urge people to think really carefully about that letter. We've been told by Canberra, people ignore automated letters, but we've seen the most moving letters from ordinary Australians about why they see this as important and their relationship with Aboriginal people or not relationship with Aboriginal people. And so just going to that website and contemplating sending a letter really matters. It has a huge impact. Because the only way we're going to do this is actually through old school engagement with politicians on the ground. And that does require, us asking you to write those letters and send them in. So that's what people can do, support the Uluru leadership, which is people who've worked on this for 30, 40 years before Uluru, and people that have come on board since, and people that were there, First Nations people. So that I'd answer that question that way. What gives hope? What gives hope? You know, the Uluru statement gives me hope because after everything that has done before them, and as we travelled around the nation talking to mobs, they were talking about youth suicide and welfare reform in their communities, and youth detention, incarceration, and the child protection system, and the mission era, the reserve issue, the protection era. There were people up in Broome who had seen some of the tail end of the massacres and the frontier war. Despite everything that has come before, our old people decided to issue an invitation to the Australian people that is so generous, and they called it an olive branch. They called it a letter to the Australians, and they said, we were like, oh guys, this is tough. This is a referendum, 8 out of 44. That's all we ever hear in Canberra. And they're like, you know what? We led 67 and we got it across the line. And a lot of those old people are involved. A lot of the leadership now were children doing 67. And that gives me hope. It gives me hope that despite everything that has come before us, our people decide, the most important thing here is building a bridge and saying this is the pathway forward, Australia. And it's a really beautiful thing. So I do urge you to read the Uluru Statement from the Uluru Statement from the Heart. But that gives me hope. And then part of what Grace said gives me hope, and that is that experience she had is the experience we have, and that is the common method of what blackfellas engage with when they're trying to resolve issues, and that is just yarning. And a big part of the voice, actually, an enshrined voice to Parliament. Politicians are the representatives of Aussies, of Australians, of all Australians, and the voice to Parliament is saying we want a continual yarn with the Australian people via their elected representatives. The Uluru Statement, the voice, is about yarning, because we know that if the executive, both the politicians and the bureaucrats yarned more with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who live on the ground, not the conduits, then the laws and policies that are made about our people will be of higher quality, because you're engaging with the people who live day in, day out in communities. And so what I thought Grace was spot on. The voice is all about yarning, and it's all about bringing the voices of those people from their communities to Canberra. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thanks, Megan. Now, I'm going to ask Melissa Hamilton to find her way up to the stage, just while I now just quickly get Rebecca and Penny to give me a hope, or what can people do?
Penny thinks that she's been running the race for marriage equality stuff forever, and it feels like it probably took forever. But to see young people walking into STREAT these days, proud of their gender and sexuality, and being able to come out of the closet and be able to do that now because our community is a different place to be. So many of the young people that we have at STREAT come out to us when they arrive, because it's the first place that they've felt safe. Many of them have become homeless because when they did come out, that's the thing that severed them from their family. But watching this next generation of trans young people find their voice and be able to be out and proud, that's only because we've had people that have gone before and just kept at that fight. So even though it's slow and it's far slower than we would ever want it to be, we change these things one conversation and one person at a time. And I thank people who have gone before and done that, and that's the only way. We've got to keep changing everything else. The other thing is, we have an election. Let's just change who we vote for.
No. Penny.
You're not responsible for our answers. Relax. It's okay. One thing to change the government. How about that? My hope, it is the next generation, but my hope is this. that what I see in our community is the Australian community, in great part, is much more decent, much more principled than much of our politics. And don't let our political debate, I mean small p political debate, right, be defined by some of the nastiness and trivia that you see defining too much of the debate from some people and from some of the media. I think we can be so much better. That gives me hope.
Thanks, Penny. So I'm now going to introduce Melissa Hamilton, who's the founder of Brave Feminine Leadership of the Brave Group, for the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. How amazing is it for all of us to have had the chance to be here tonight and to see this extraordinary leadership in action. It's my absolute pleasure to be able to give the vote of thanks for tonight. I genuinely believe that the world gets better when the incredible privilege and responsibility of leadership is equally shared. To me, that means that the leadership style that got us here won't get us where we need to go to address some of the challenges that we've discussed here tonight. My co-founder Kelly Hayes and I have both been CEOs. We've led organisations of over 6,000 people globally, and we know what it takes to stand up and lead at that level. We've both been long-term CEDA trustees. The reason we've chosen that is because of their commitment to change, because of their commitment to hold dialogues like the dialogue and debate that we've sat here and witnessed tonight. Really gets right to the issues at the heart of Australian economic and social way of life. For me, I'm passionate about elevating female leaders. And, you know, when I think of our top companies, when I think of the ASX 300, and I think in 2021, 1 of 23 CEO appointments was a female. Within that group, only 6% are female CEOs. And now I'm reading about, well, we've talked about the pay gap, now I'm reading about the promotion gap, where females are often given significantly higher performance ratings, yet their potential as leaders is questionable. Tonight's been remarkable. We've seen extraordinary courage and resilience of these leaders to truly stand as brave and authentic leaders. I took so much away from tonight. I thought, how can I just sum up 3 things? But I'll give it a go. Just the courage that each of these leaders has shown in stepping up and acknowledging a problem that they couldn't unsee, and the passion that's kept them at that problem. Listening. The power of change and talking to people who don't agree, getting outside of your own circle and learning from others. A new model of leadership, standing side by side. The thing that struck me most, though, is that leadership is a choice, and each of these leaders have made extraordinary choices. I'm really proud tonight to share that, you know, we wanted to do something special for this event, and thanks CEDA for pulling it together. And so we're offering a number of scholarships to female leaders here tonight. We're offering 3 scholarships. 2 to emerging female leaders and 1 to a senior female executive. I would encourage all of you, dotted around the back of the room, there's some QR codes, and I believe they'll be made available to the online audience. If you scan that code, you can enter for the chance for you or someone in your organisation to join us. I have a challenge before I say thank you to these wonderful leaders. And my challenge is, for each of you, I loved hearing the questions coming through about how can we help and what can we do. So I'm just going to ask you very briefly, I want you just to think about what is the one thing you can do. And I know that one of the ways to keep you accountable for doing that is very quickly to ask you to turn to the person next to you and share that commitment. Could you do that now, please? Okay, there's some pretty big commitments there. So it's now, congratulations, there's going to be a lot of commitments made. I can tell that straight away. It's good. There's going to be a lot of change starting here tonight. So let me Let me now ask you to join me in thanking, firstly, the incredible Rana Hussain with her opening tonight. Professor Megan Davis. Rebecca Scott. Grace Tame, if she can still hear us. And Senator the Honourable Penny Wong. I'm now going to hand back to Melinda to ask her to close the event, but I would just sum this up by saying it seems like a group of women who are pretty good at getting shit done.
I know. The team at CEDA has this challenge with our events, and we talk about it as going from PG conversations to MA15, and I think we've hit it out of the park tonight. I don't want to say anything else. It was a fantastic close. Thank you, Melissa, and I don't think there's anything I can add to what these wonderful women have contributed tonight. Thank you for being here with us this evening. Thank you to those on the live stream. We do have a crackerjack set of programs coming up, cedar.com.au, and check out the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Thank you so much, and then we are going to have drinks and conversations, so thank you.